When I am changing slides, is it moving for y'all?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right. So our main goal for this is just to generate some questions around parental family leave. I think it's a really important opportunity to just discuss what it looks like to even think about, discussing your family and, being in housing and residential work. Innately, our work is personal. Innately, what we are doing has a personal component. And so when your personal life intersects with your job, it's this really weird space of how you navigate it. So just generating some questions about like, what should you be doing if you're considering this, or your colleague is presenting this, or maybe you are a supervisor and and you want to advocate for that person as best as you can. So another thing is just sharing leave structure from my previous experiences. I have 2 children. And I had one leave experience that was awesome, and I had one leave experience that was terrible. And I think it's important to like speak about those honestly. And then lastly, identifying some institutional and community resources to discuss parental leave process, parental support, and childcare. I think there's a huge deficit in knowledge about what these experiences can look like and what you can do to advocate for yourself and what your institution has a responsibility for you to do. All right. So a side note, I want to completely acknowledge my own identities in this space as a straight white male, a married male, that this is, I'm bringing a lot of privilege into this space, especially when we talk about the concept of expanding families. It is this massive intersection of deeply personal things. It relates to biology, it relates to gender identity, it relates to sexual identity, it relates to family stuff, money, privilege, race, ethnicity. It is an innately personal topic. And so I want to just acknowledge that there are some spaces in this where I'm bringing privilege into it. I personally did not carry a child in my body for 36 to 42 weeks. My sleep cycle was disrupted, but I didn't physically change as a result of having a child. And so, the experiences I have is talking about parental leave and family leave is different. I also want to acknowledge that my wife and I had our children biologically, and like we didn't have to pursue fertility treatments or expensive doctor's visits, and that everything was relatively normal for us. So I don't have experience with adoption or fostering or surrogacy or those things. And so I want to acknowledge that once again, this is a very personal space. And so I want to acknowledge that there are privileges and experiences that I don't have and privileges I do. So as much as I can, I'd like to speak to you all about my experiences, and hopefully they will be supportive to you as you support yourself or your journey or your colleagues or whatever that might be. Okay. All right, so we have an opportunity for questions. So if you go to Slido, it's sli.do. And when you go to the website, it gives you an opportunity to put in a code. Our code is 68842. And you can use this as an opportunity to just drop tons of questions, whatever those might be. And if they're pertinent to like the slide I'm on, I can answer them or I can wait for them at the end. But this is an opportunity for those that have questions that are personal in nature that they don't necessarily want to like unmute themselves and put out there. Just like with our RAs, there are times that there are questions in the room that many people have, but that they don't have the opportunity, they don't necessarily want to vocalize those. So as questions come in, we can review those, but it's just a space for dumping questions, and then we can answer those at the end if there's any that we don't really get to in the presentation. So is that working for everybody? I'm going to put in a test one just so that way. And so then it creates like a trend, it tracks all the questions. So you can be anonymous, you can put your name if you're interested, but this is an opportunity for us to just put some questions out there. All right. So some just thoughts about parental leave. I just want to acknowledge and start saying that it is a deeply personal situation. This is where the not knowing of someone's history related to their experiences with creating a family, their want to do so, their desire, their own personal family structure, it is a very deeply personal conversation. And so I want to acknowledge that if you're here to get more information for yourself or support a peer or a colleague, that it requires a lot of vulnerability. And there are a lot of times where, in my experiences as we were navigating this with our first child, I didn't know how to ask the questions that I was having. I was very confused. It was a big emotional journey. I was supporting a partner that was also trying to figure out, like, what does this mean that we're bringing a child in this world? It's a very deeply personal conversation. And so if you have a colleague that is going through this, if this is something you're pursuing, I just want to acknowledge that this is a huge emotional reservoir. It can bring up a lot. And so I think a good rule always is, if you don't know, ask delicately. So if you are a supervisor and one of your supervisees says, this is something I'm exploring, you can ask what their plans are, how you can best support them delicately, and offering support in ways that are structural in nature. And we can talk a little bit about what your institutional support looks like. But if you don't know, it's about asking delicately. It is about acknowledging and providing deference to the fact that this is a hard topic. This is a very personal situation. And then it's important to create room for adjustment depending on the circumstances. So as you're thinking about parental leave, family leave, one thing that I did not do with our first child that I did with our second was I created a lot more buffer room. I created a lot more space for flexibility. We were very lucky with both of our children that both of those children had like safe and good deliveries for mom and baby, but that's not always the circumstance. I have colleagues that have had different circumstances. And so I think one thing, and we'll talk about it with my experiences, is that I didn't really create space for flexibility. And we're very, very lucky that we didn't need that space. But we'll talk about that. All right, so this is one of my children. This is Jane. This is Super Jane. She did this on her own, which, as a Marvel Comics nerd, that was like a beautiful moment for me. And then this photo of her in the snow was from last week, which a university photographer happened to catch. So that was just a really, really adorable thing. So Jane will be 3 in April. She was our first. She is a mess. She's obsessed with Frozen. And she is the world's pickiest eater. She will not eat it unless it's buttered pasta. So that's currently Jane. She's the best. And this is Maggie. Maggie is 5 months old. Look at that little face. She's just a little chunk. My sister-in-law got her this. It's a reference to the movie or the TV show Schitt's Creek. Ew, David is something that one of the sisters, the characters say. But yeah, so that's Maggie. She's 5 months old. She's like the chillest baby in the world. I'm very concerned because as a family unit, for those that know me and my family, we're very high energy. So I'm deeply concerned that she's so chill. I'm a little concerned. So a little bit about my own story. So Jane is almost 3. We had a super challenging parental leave with this one. So my wife and I, we moved to my current institution, Vanderbilt University, in July of 2017 after leaving a wonderful job at Auburn University. It's much closer to my wife's family, all of this stuff. It's like the skies are opening. It's a wonderful experience. And then a month later, after we found out that we were there, we found out we were pregnant. So it was a really challenging parental leave. I did not qualify for parental leave by the institutional framework. So I didn't qualify for FMLA, which means I also didn't qualify for parental leave in any way. So I had to save all my time. I had to be very miserly with all that. So that way we could, afford what a parental leave could look like from using my paid time off. And there was really unclear coverage of the responsibilities. And I can go into that with a greater detail. But I was really relying on the relationship with my supervisor to really help amplify the responsibility and taking care of those things that are happening in my job. But it wasn't really there. I'm going to call it what it was. And there was just not a lot of attention and detail to me as a supervisee saying, I really, really need help. And this is where I talk about where there's that important sense of vulnerability, is I kept on going in one-on-ones saying, I really need to make this plan. I have a lot of emotional energy around this. I'm getting nervous, I'm getting excited. I'm on the verge of this big life moment, and I really, really need help. I really need help with figuring out how we're going to do this. How are my RAs going to exist? How are my faculty partnerships going to happen? Who's going to work with these facilities people that are just a mess? Because I have at that time I had 4 buildings and I had 4 maintenance supervisors, as opposed to all my colleagues who had 1 maintenance supervisor. So 4 people who all did things very differently. It was a fun time. And so it was a really challenging experience. We were very lucky with Jane that there were a lot of things about her arrival that were positive, but it was not entirely positive. My wife was really struggling with postpartum depression at the time. She was struggling with feeding. Everybody kind of like, the whole concept of having a child, if you choose to do so biologically or through surrogacy, is like, great, the baby's born and then it's awesome. And then like, that's the end of the movie. When really it's like, you have to be prepared for the marathon of what happens afterwards. And we were absolutely not prepared for that. So with that pregnancy coming out of it, I only took 7 days of PTO, because in the 4 days where we were not in a hospital and we were in our apartment on campus, I was getting flooded with text messages from faculty partners, from facilities partners, from my RAs about how at that time my previous supervisor was just not taking care of things. And there were some things that were emergent that were not being attended to. And so I actually dropped what I was doing and I just decided to start working at 7 days of post PTO, which I absolutely regret in a lot of ways, but I also, in retrospect, and I want to acknowledge this, if you're a peer of somebody or if this is something you choose to pursue or you're a supervisor, you can't help but feel guilty the entire time that you're not at work, because that's what you've been doing. That's how you oftentimes like sustain your lifestyle. So I felt incredibly guilty, and I felt that there was a need for me to jump back into work immediately. It was not positive. I was frustrated and I was angry. I wasn't sleeping through the night, obviously, and it was a really emotional time. I was an emotional powder keg, for lack of a better term, and it was not positive. It caused a lot of resentment with me and my former supervisor, and that was really damaging to my working relationship with him. And I regret that, because I think it could have gone differently with different circumstances. So, pandemic starts happening last spring. We're just, like living our lives. And then we just found out that we were pregnant. Like pre-pandemic, this is something that we talked about, but then we found out we were pregnant in the middle of the pandemic, which is just a terrifying experience, because we didn't know anything about the coronavirus. Remember, we called it the novel coronavirus because we didn't know anything about it. And so to walk through a pregnancy, and that was a fascinating experience. However, in the time of all these changes, I got a new supervisor who is the greatest. If you ever get the chance to work with Courtney Berry, she is just a fabulous and incredible professional. And she really showed up for me in ways that I didn't expect. She said to me, Danny, this is not an experience I have. I want to know how I can help you. I need to know how to show up for you. When you're ready and when you have those materials ready, I will do whatever you need. I will be there for you. She went to human resources and watched 8 hours of e-learning about family leave and parental support. And she was texting me about all these parental groups that I didn't even know existed at the university. And so she spent and dedicated so much time to the support of me as just a supervisor, saying, this is something I don't know about. This is something I need to know more about to support you. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to inform myself. And so I was obviously much more informed after having one child to what it would look like for the second one. But I was so thankful for her support, and just the fact that she showed up for me, and she, in a very different way, said, I need to know how to help you, because at the end of the day, you need to disconnect. I did qualify for parental leave this time. I took my 2 weeks of parental leave, and then I took an additional week off of paid time off. And then there was much more clear coverage of responsibility. So I'll show you the matrix that I used. But she was especially supportive and being very clear about it. And I feel like with everything with COVID, we were talking about phases. Everything was a phase. Phase 1, we do this. Phase 2, we do this. So she said, we need to take your parental leave plan and we need to put it on a time scale. And that was genius. And so, I'll show what that looked like, so that way we can really kind of envision how it all wrapped up. So in organizing some of those some of the responsibilities that a position has, I think it's helpful to think about 3 parts of it, which is just really considering what are your job responsibilities? In residence life and housing, we have the worst job descriptions because they never actually encapsulate what we do. It's always the first 3 lines are pretty accurate, but if I had to describe my job in 10 bullet points or less, it would still be generalizing a lot of things. And so it was important for my supervisor and I to really outline what are my regular responsibilities versus what are the sporadic ones. So the sporadic ones were on-call work. And so She and I articulated like, here's the plan for on call. You're gonna like front load and back load. You're not gonna do anything in this 8-week period. And I was able to advocate for that to my peers and say, here's the time frame. I cannot be on duty on this time frame. I will front load and back load in those ways. And then who's best positioned to cover those responsibilities? I have a graduate assistant who is wonderful. This year, because of budget cuts, we don't have our individual graduate assistants. We're sharing them this year. And so we made this plan in June, and then we got budget cuts and we couldn't hire a new grad student. So we had to revisit the matrix and say, okay, who's best positioned to do this? Is Courtney the best person to do this? Is Emily, the graduate assistant? I ironically have another Emily. Is Emily the best person to do this? Are our head residents? Who in this system can manage some of these things? And my supervisor got super creative actually with this. So for example, we have a communications and marketing coordinator. And so she said, can we allocate some of her time for when you're out to manage some of the correspondence for students? And so she, as a person who's naturally kind of tapped into the network of who does what, was able to really manage a lot of the communication flow from residents when they said, I have a flood in my room, I have a this in my situation, there's bugs, whatever it was. She was a lot more tapped in to be able to readily respond, as opposed to, does this actually require supervisory responsibility like my supervisor? And then how long is the timeline associated? So typically, if you're talking about like a person who is having the child, it's usually 10 to 12 weeks. I think it's really important to acknowledge this like right now, that everything about the like parental planning process is complicated, and it is wrapped up in sexism and heteronormativity and ableism, and there's a lot that's there. And so I want to fully acknowledge that the experience that I had as a person that was not necessarily having the baby, but was like a partner to somebody, the timeout that I had was different. And so I think it's really, really important for anybody that's going through this, especially if they would be the person, physically having a child, that they really read into the information, that they allocate what their rights and what should be provided to them. I also want to acknowledge that in some ways, in many ways, it's unfair, because the only reason why my wife was compensated for her maternity leave was because she took out short-term disability insurance, which meant that she got paid 60% of her pay for 8 weeks of the 12 weeks she was out. But we were paying for this. So there's a lot of problems there. So that's why I want to say it's really important to review what your institution provides, what resources you need to be looking into ahead of time. With our first pregnancy, my wife hadn't taken out the short-term disability. When she signed up for her benefits, we didn't know about that. And then when we found out we were pregnant, it was considered a pre-existing condition. So I want to acknowledge that in some ways, part of your ability to sustain whatever it is preparation, which is not great. And I think that there's a lot of structural things that we as a community can do to fix that. But I think it's important to acknowledge that timeline piece and the compensation piece of what time out looks like is specific to your institution and the policies that they have, and potentially your ability to secure additional things that you have to pay out of pocket for. So my plan, because of the fact that I was not carrying the child physically, was that we had kind of a month timeline of out of the office, kind of getting back into the office, and back in the office fully. And so for those that were back to work plan, we talked a lot about what priorities do we need to prioritize, which responsibilities, what things do I need to be doing that first week back? Okay, I have faculty partnerships. I need to be getting back into those. I need to check on how they're doing, and I need to get tapped in with what's happening there. I need to be responding to corrective actions issues with my student staff. Ironically, 2 of my staff members did some pretty illegal and messy stuff when I was out on paternity leave. And then I spent the whole month, my first month back, dismissing them. It was awesome and fun and exciting. I had also implicated like 4 other RAs. So it was just this whole like, oh, like 4 of y'all are on probation and 2 y'all are fired. And then it was a fun time. And then how do evening crisis response roles begin? So on average with my current role, I have at least 3 nights of evening work a week, sometimes 4. Because I advise councils, I have student staff meetings, I have faculty meetings and things like that. So we kind of mapped out like, what do I actually need to be at? At this event where a faculty member is just like hanging out with students and passing out food, do I need to be at that? I'm going to go get a cookie because that's what she texted me to do, and go back and like bring a cookie back for my wife who's, you know, been up all night with a child. Staff meeting, I was able to just like jump in and say, hey, show them the baby, and then dip out, right? So my supervisor kept those things going. And so we had a much more gradient plan with our second experience that was much more successful for us. Once again, I think there were a lot of factors with our first that were really challenging, but because I kind of just like got catapulted back into it. But I think the second time it was a lot more like, hey, you're not going to be sleeping through the night. You're going to be up every 2-3 hours. At that point, and for our circumstance, we also have a toddler who has to go to school, has to go to daycare. We have a needy dog, all these things. So it was a much more gradient effect and it was a much more effective approach. And then reviewing the parental leave matrix. So at like 25 weeks, so in the pregnancy, my boss said, like, I need to see a really good preliminary draft of this. Like, I need to see something that we can review, I can discuss, and I can think on, because at the end of the day, she's saying, I am very happy to take this on, but I have to figure out how this is going to work in with all my other stuff. So I'm going to do it. I just need to make sure how we finesse this. So she came back with some advice. She came back with some feedback. So then at like 30 weeks, we finalized the plan. And at that point, we said, like, this is the plan. This is how we're going to do this. And this is how we're going to move forward. At like 34-ish weeks, I think this is when like RAs came back. My supervisor was in every staff meeting. She was just coming in, getting to know the staff, getting to know them, getting to know their personalities. So that way, when I was out, she already knew the playing field. And then we shared the plan with them probably at like 36 weeks out, from the 36 weeks into the pregnancy. My student staff knew who was going to be doing what, and saying, this is your home base. Rather than just texting or calling Danny, your supervisor, this is your home base. Your home base is you're going to reach out to this person or this person or this person. You're going to reach out to them for these situations. And so it was a much more successful experience because we were much more communicative, much more thoughtful, and much more intentional about how we did it. Acknowledging that the first part, there was just like total ignorance on my part. I thought it was just like, great, we're gonna have a baby, it's gonna be awesome. And then like, I'll just like go back to work. That's how that goes. That's how it goes in movies. And wasn't thinking about the fact that there could be complications after having a baby. It could be exhausting. You could have a baby that doesn't sleep. You could live on a college campus next to a construction site, and that construction site wakes up your child every night. That's what happened to me. And then we moved, and it was glorious. So this is I know it looks a little rudimentary. So like, I want to say that I've been talking about this big structure and it looks just like an Excel spreadsheet, but like, cause that's what it was. But the way we did it was we really outlined like the big responsibilities of my job. So RA supervision for the one-on-ones with the RAs and HRs. I have a weekly meeting with my head residents, and then I have a weekly meeting with all my staff. I work with faculty members. So Dr. Igo, Dr. Woods, and Anya, those are my faculty and academic partners. And some of these are prioritized based off of the ease of that partner. For those of you that work with faculty partners, every day is different, and sometimes the things that they do are just surprising. So my supervisor managing some of those relationships versus my graduate assistant was different for that reason. Our facilities, who's working with my area maintenance supervisors, who's working with assignments changes, and then who's doing follow-up related to our student care things. So on this spreadsheet, the way it works is phase one, because once again, COVID makes us love a phase, completely unavailable, just like I'm out. Danny is fully in parenting land, not talking or doing anything. My boss also made me delete my email off my phone, which was a terrifying experience, but I have to say, it was so liberating. I advise everybody to do that when they go on like an extended leave. So like the estimated time, 2 weeks, right? We talked about how this could be 2 weeks, this could be 3 weeks if needed. So then, that should say phase two, because typos happen still. Partially available. So at this point, my first week in, I did half time. So I came back for just afternoons. Mornings tended to be harder for my daughter Maggie. It was just like a rougher time. We were pretty groggy, but afternoons were a lot easier, much easier pace. So I would come in afternoons for a week. I did that for about a week. And then at that point, I started taking over certain supervision things. I started jumping back into my faculty relationships. I started coming back to staff meetings. Meanwhile, my supervisor is still kind of like following up and finishing up on assignments changes, facilities issues, student care related things that were more time consuming. And my graduate assistant was stepping in continually with those relationships, with the staff meetings, with the faculty relationships there. My head residents still continuing to just have one-on-ones with their buildings. And then phase three, I'm back. The ideal would be like 4 weeks post-baby for my circumstance of not having carried a child. So that was the goal there, was to have kind of like a month out, be fully integrated back in slowly. So that's kind of the general framework that we used. So on the spreadsheet I provided, I had multiple tabs. One of the tabs was all the Zoom links for every recurring meeting that was already in existence. I made her co-host of all those spaces, provided all the passwords, all that. And then I provided her a detailed outline of each human on my team. And I said, okay, this person is not showing up administratively. This is not going well. Things along those lines. And then finally, just care notes related to student-related issues. So some general resources that I think are really important to get connected with, as far as if this is something that you're considering, your peer is considering, you have a staff member that's considering, whatever it might be. Human resources is the one that is going to provide the hard boundaries of exactly what your leave can or can't look like. And so they're going to have the clear guideline. They'll be outlining what your FMLA, eligibility looks like, what disability pay, compensation, extra benefits that might be needed, any and all of those things. It's going to live there. Your leave policy is all going to live there. I highly suggest that if you do a deeper dive into your institution, they will likely have modules or information pages or resources or handbooks or PDFs on how to navigate these things. At my institution, at least, we have like a HR person for our division. Get to know your division HR human, because that is a person that you should be able to call up and say, hey, I am super confused about what all these things mean. What do I qualify for? What do I need to start planning for? And it's their responsibility as human resources to be a resource for their humans. And so they should have they should have that information. And if they don't have it, it's their responsibility to solicit it. And so I'm a person that information is power. So I am a person that, in my first leave, I didn't really think about like, oh, human resources, I should be talking to them. My second one, you better believe I had her on. I was emailing her. I was saying, I want to clarify these things. I have a question about this, this, and this. Can we set up a phone call? She probably thought I was annoying, but frankly, I had all the information I needed. So I don't care if I was annoying, because that's what you have to do to advocate for yourself sometimes. Your physician or your medical personnel. So depending on where you are in relationship to, like, if you're in a rural community, if you're in an urban city, you might have multiple options. I also want to acknowledge that insurance and all those other things are also very complicated and sometimes really, really difficult to navigate. I think it's important that if you or another person or somebody you supervise, that they should be comfortable and they should be connected with their physician or their medical personnel. There should be rapport with them. There should be a connection and a sense of trust. So that way you can say, hey, I really need to discuss what our leave looks like, or, if our birth plan changes or something changes drastically, I need to know the landscape. And so I think having that person as kind of like a partner in your planning is really helpful, especially for those that might have other bodily things that they have to worry about, if they have other conditions that they have to take into consideration, if age is a factor, if ability is a factor in a birthing experience or building a family, all of those things, once again, it's a layered situation. So getting to know and having a good relationship with your medical personnel, whoever those look like, are important. My wife used midwives because that's what she wanted. And I was like, cool, you're the driver. If you want, however you want to do this is up to you. I'm here and I will be there. I think identifying colleagues and peers at your institution about their experiences is very helpful, whether that's through a parental planning group or a family support group or whatever that might be. I actually co-lead one of those now, and I wish I had been starting going to those things at the beginning of my time, because it was so informative, and it's so exhausting at the beginning that you can't really think straight. And I think it's important to be able to have people that you can talk to people that will relate to the fact that sometimes your kids get ear infections and so you can't come to meetings, and then they'll just be like, yeah, ear infections are terrible. Why don't children's ears function better? And the answer is because they're growing and they will fix themselves. But it's you need to have the support. And then also identifying colleagues outside your institution. You know, the higher ed is such a weird fishbowl that sometimes the way our institutions respond to things, the way that how our human resources work, what our jobs look like, what the pace of our work looks like, it's so strange to the outside world. And so I think it can be really helpful in normalizing to identify like, oh, is this the way that my organization should be responding to me choosing to build a family? Yeah, that sounds right. Okay, you're in a corporate environment and they're responding to that way too. Or you talk to a friend and they're like, no, that's super strange and I can't believe your supervisor said that to you. Having that ability to have an outside perspective is so validating when you're going through this, because everything about it is just frankly terrifying in many ways. It's wonderful and amazing and great, but it's also scary and emotional. New parent groups are amazing. New parent groups are awesome. I know that COVID is probably making that really, really uncomfortable, but having people that have had children before or built families before, it's just incredibly validating to be able to be with somebody else when you have a 5-week-old and they have a 6-week-old and they're complaining about something like, oh, cool, that's normal, great. Babies do that because it's, you know, baby books make it out to be everything about them is terrifying and that you should be worried about everything all the time. But sometimes just being able to normalize that, like, this is normal, that what my child is experiencing or what my spouse is experiencing or what my partner is experiencing is normal. And I think to have it feeling normal in that whole process is really hard. So sometimes some outside feedback is helpful for that. And then identity-based groups. My wife identifies as a cis woman, and she was actually doing yoga at like a specific maternity yoga studio. And she found it very, very helpful to be kind of like in a new moms group. So like they would do yoga and it was next door to a restaurant, and then they would like all buy food and sit together with babies and like eat burgers and hang out with babies. And it was amazing. It was so validating for her. I also think that it's important if you're a member of the LGBTQ community, or if there's ability or race or ethnicity, to have people that have similar backgrounds to you that you can connect with about it. I think it helps continue to normalize how you are responding to this very new stimulus in your life called a child. And so sometimes it's just so important to have somebody that you can relate to in a deeper way. So some of you may walk away from this presentation and say, like, that guy was a white dude, and like, I don't know that I would want to talk to him about having a baby. That's okay. Or build a family. Like that's okay. I might not be the person for you, but I would encourage everybody that's in this process, that you're supporting somebody through this process, that you encourage them to engage in community around this, because it can be a very isolating experience when the only way that a child can often communicate with you is yelling at you or screaming at you or crying because they don't know words yet. And it's very hard when a baby cries at you. So yeah, I think getting connected with resources is something that with our first experience, we did not do in any way. And I think it was to our detriment. And I would encourage everybody that's considering this or wanting to do this or actively pursuing this, get connected with others, because while there are some times where it can be a little messy, it is incredibly validating for what you could be experiencing. All right, so am I back sharing? We're back to the, I don't need to share my screen anymore. Okay, there we are. All right, back. So that was the end of the presentation. I know I talked a lot. I wanted to save time. If there are questions, I don't see any in the Q&A, which is totally fine. If anybody wants to vocalize questions or put those in now, this would be the time.
So as a live-on person, did you have issues with like students or staff members? I know you said for Maggie, your staff knew that you were going to be gone and that was kind of better managed, but like, did you have problems with them coming to your apartment and like wanting something?
No, so with our first one, so Jane, our first, was actually born like right before our campus concert series. So there was a particular moment where I will say it was not my most professional moment. that a crowd of 25 intoxicated students woke up my freshly asleep child, and I might have walked outside in the lobby with her screaming. And I was like, hey, cool it. Like, go to your party. This sign says that there's a baby on the door, and you're at Vanderbilt, which I think means that you can read. Like, let's be cool. Now let's not do this. That was not, like, once again, not a positive, engaging, student development centered moment. Okay.
That's
but it is
okay.
personal. Okay. So I think in that sense, in our first apartment, we were very much like in the center of a residential community. So we were very much like getting woken up all the time. However, I think that's made her an incredible sleeper today. So, you know, challenges create just these wonderful development moments. For our second, where we live, is much more like on the corner of the building, so we don't have those issues. I think one thing that I didn't expect to have be an issue was discussing about if you are a live-in staff member and you have furniture that's provided by your department inside your apartment, asking it to be removed for a crib, right? That was a fascinating moment when, at that time, somebody who was very senior said no, they would not remove a bed from a room so I could get a crib to fit in the room. And then thankfully the dean of students was like, I'm sorry, like the baby can't sleep on a queen bed. As much as like that would be a great space for our baby, like that's awesome, so much room. Babies don't sleep in queen beds. And so sometimes it is, you know, as a live-in staff member, it's very alien anyways that you're an adult on campus. And so it's even more alien that you say, I might have a partner or a spouse living in with me. And then it's weirder when you say, I'm going to bring a little person on campus. So it's, you have to overcompensate. You really do, because it's, if you're working with people that's not their own experience or that's not something that they're pursuing, you have to articulate and say, hey, we're 10 weeks out from a baby. Like, we really need to talk about my leave plan. Like, we need to talk about this, which sometimes you have a supervisor that's like in it and got it. Like my second one, Courtney Berry, once again, all-star, was just plugged in the entire time and was just like, great. Oh, doctor's appointment, don't worry about PTO. Just like, go. Like, I don't care, forward your phone. Incredibly supportive. And I think largely my assumption about my first supervisor was that because they had had a child that he knew how to support me. Maybe in retrospect, I should have articulated more. Once again, I think I was very naive about what having a building a family looked like. But you have to overcompensate a little bit. And once again, acknowledging that it's a very personal situation. So like, it is uncomfortable to say, I need support in the duty structure because I have an infant. You're not asking anybody else to do more for you. You're not saying, hey, there's X amount of us, I need to do less duty because I have a baby. That's not what you're saying. You're saying, I need support. I need assistance. I want to do my job to my best. So would anybody be willing to split weeks with me? Split duty weeks are amazing, by the way. Anyways, outside of like this conversation, I love a split duty week. Work on Monday through Thursday, pass that phone off to the weekend. Go enjoy your weekend. But I had great colleagues that said, okay, you do Monday, Tuesday of this week, then do Wednesday, Thursday of the following week. And it was so much better. The first time I was just like, no, I am great. I got this. No one's helping me. And I just was like defiant about it. And it was not good. I'm going to continue to say that my first one, did I respond the way I wanted to? No, but it's so visceral in that space. And so because it's so personal, you have to overcompensate a little bit if there are people around you that aren't necessarily feeling the priority that it is for you. If it's a priority for you, you have to make sure that it's a priority for other people, while also acknowledging that it is very uncomfortable. It is so uncomfortable to have to speak those words. So how you choose to do that, I think it's helpful to like practice and recast and write down notes and have follow-up meetings. I mean, like, it feels very strange to have to say that you have to systematize your choice to build a family, but you do, because there are spaces in which you might have super supportive people around you, or it might be so foreign that they're like, who is this rando? And why is he having a baby on a campus? That's weird, right? Like, so you have to acknowledge that you're going to get both ends of the spectrum and you have to be the person that advocates for yourself. I would love for this utopian society where we don't have to do that, but that is the circumstance that we're in. And I think for people with historically disenfranchised identities, it is harder. And that's why building a relationship with people around you to connect with and plan out these conversations and ask good questions and create boundaries is so helpful. So I probably just didn't answer your question. I rambled.
No, you did.
Oh, okay.
It's nice, like, hearing your experience.
I mean, it was fun.
Obviously, I'm not in like a place where this is gonna be anytime soon, but you know, I did want to come and potentially something for the future. So.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that it might not be something you want to pursue right now, but you might have a supervisee that comes to you after working for you after a month and says, hey, I know you don't know me. I mean, this is exactly what I did. I literally said, you don't know me that well. This is not part of our plan. Like, this was something that we wanted, but like not a week after we moved, and I'm running to the Rite Aid across the street to go get pregnancy tests. Like, that's bananas. That's ridiculous. But that's what happened. And like, I would have loved to have had my second experience where somebody showed up and said, I want to honor the fact that you got a big change and I need to show up for you. So tell me how you want me to show up for you. And I got you. And she did. And like, oh, I'm glad it's recorded that Courtney Berry is the best. Yes.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons I wanted to hop on, not for myself, but one of my supervisees actually just had a baby yesterday. So
oh my gosh.
That is
how
exciting.
timely.
Literally, and he's actually supposed to present this morning. So obviously, you know, that's fun.
Don't let him present from the delivery room. Do not do it. Don't let him.
Oh, no, he did not. Yeah. We got someone to fill in for him. It was a little bit early. That also is kind of what like sparked that thought, as well. It's actually supposed to be a couple of weeks from now, but you never know when she decides to come. So
there's no planning. There's like nothing. We like didn't have winter clothes for like our first child was born in spring, so we didn't have anything. We didn't have a jacket. I mean, a cold snap when she was born. I was like, bringing a kid home from the hospital in like 7 blankets, which is also dangerous. Don't do that.
Right.
You don't know that. So
absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, and he was asking all sorts of things about like time off and what that looks like. And I mean, I kind of know a little bit, but you know, I really wanted to get a good perspective. So
I think a gradient is the best possible situation. Is just like trying to say like, this is a hard area where you're not going to talk to me. You're going to text me because you have a fire alarm in your apartment and you need it fixed because you finally got a baby to fall asleep. And that's what, or my mother-in-law got 4 parking tickets in the 4 hours that she was there after we came home with her first. And I just took pictures of them. I said, I need you to fix this. I don't want to deal with parking. I don't want to do this. Please get rid of these. Like, we just had a baby. So like making a space where it's like, do not text me about work. You can absolutely send me baby pictures if that's what you feel comfortable doing. Text me if you need Taco Bell, but do not text me about work. And in fact, I had a colleague who they have like a 3-week-old who was texting me about work stuff. And I was like, no, sir. You can text me because I have preemie clothes, I have newborn clothes, and I have blankets. You may not text me about work. He was like, you should pick up this. All right. No, don't talk to me about work. I will bring you cookout. I will bring you Taco Bell, and I will be supportive to you, but I will not talk to you about work. So I think being a person that creates those boundaries is really helpful. And then that gradient coming back in. So it's like, let's talk about this. What do you actually need to do when you come back? You probably need to get settled back in. You need to clear that inbox. You need to handle some stuff that's a problem. Do you need to go to every single committee meeting? Probably not. I don't know that you need to go to your training committee meeting because training is going to happen whether you got a baby or not. So I think trying to normalize the like, just ease into it if you can.
Annie, I just wanted to say thank you for about all this. I think this is a topic where I kind of feel like I don't know what I don't know until like you go through it the first time. And so I just really appreciate your honesty about
no problem.
what that was like for your first time versus your
Absolutely no problem. We are getting the like, we need to go. So Tina sent out the link That's the like the evaluation. So please do that. Click that, and then goodbye. You were wonderful. If you need my email, I'm Danny Coradazzi, and I work in housing at Vanderbilt. I'm wearing a checkered shirt.